Hey everyone, welcome back to Data of the Past. Today, we've got a chilling historical story that will take you back to one of the most terrifying events in European history. So grab your headphones, get comfortable, and make sure you stay till the very end, because this story is full of suspense, mystery, and unbelievable events. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you won't miss any of our amazing historical tales.
The Mountain of Lies, the unbelievable true story of America's great diamond hoax. The Allure of the West. The dust, the dream, and the $15 million pebble. September 1872, the Grand Central Hotel, New York City. The carpet in the hotel's private parlor, a crimson velvet affair imported from France, muffled the anxious pacing of three of the most powerful men in America. Outside, the clamor of Manhattan was a distant, irrelevant hum. Inside, the air was thick with cigar smoke and the scent of money, an intoxicating combination that usually fueled the nation. But tonight, it just fed a raw, nervous energy. Horace Greeley, the fiery, famous editor and political titan, stood by the mantelpiece, his usually composed face etched with an uncharacteristic impatience. Next to him, utterly still and radiating an almost predatory calm, was General George S. Dodge, a hero of the recent war and a rail magnate whose lines carved tracks across the promised land. The third man, the host, was the legend himself, Baron Rothschild. His presence alone was an endorsement worth millions. He held a small, rough, chamois pouch, turning it over and over, his attention not focused on his guests, but on the silent messenger across the room. The messenger, a man named Philip Arnold, was an anonymous figure a year prior, now suddenly the most sought-after person on the continent. He was a Kentuckian, raw-boned, with hands scarred by labor, but his eyes, dark, shrewd, and utterly impenetrable, held the secret to a fortune that could redefine American wealth. Mr. Arnold, the Baron's voice was a low velvet rumble, thick with authority. You have presented me with raw diamonds, sapphires, rubies, and emeralds, unpolished, taken directly from the earth. My assayers, the best in the world, confirm their provenance. They value the sample at roughly $15 million for the material alone. Greeley leaned forward, his spectacles glinting. But the mine, Arnold, the source, is it truly as boundless as you claim? A mountain littered with stones? Arnold gave a slow, measured nod, a gesture that seemed to cost him great effort. Boundless, gentlemen. It's a seam that runs for miles. Not a mine, but a field. I've already taken a fortune out, sold it to financiers in London and San Francisco. Now I offer you, the leaders of America, the chance to secure the greatest mineral find in human history. The three titans exchanged an electrifying look. America was in the throes of Reconstruction, a period of breathtaking industrial and financial expansion. Gold had built California, silver had fueled Nevada. But diamonds? Diamonds meant Europe's power shifted to America. Diamonds meant a permanent, unchallenged position as the wealthiest nation on Earth. It meant the creation of the world's first true diamond monopoly, controlled entirely by American capital. General Dodge stepped forward, his military precision returning. We are prepared to form the syndicate, Mr. Arnold, the San Francisco and New York Mining Company. We will capitalize it with $10 million immediately, but you must take us there. We must see it. Arnold, however, shook his head. No, the location must remain secret until the final papers are signed and the first $300,000 is deposited into my Swiss account. The West is a wilderness of claim jumpers and desperados. I need to know the money is safe, and I need a solemn vow that I will be given the position of chief superintendent for life. The demand was audacious, yet the prize was immeasurable. A mountain of diamonds. The very thought defied geology, yet the evidence, the glittering rough stones on the mahogany table, was irrefutable. They agreed. The deal was struck. Over the next few weeks, the news, held under the strictest secrecy, began to leak. Whispers in the boardrooms of Wall Street, urgent cablegrams crossing the Atlantic. The greatest find since the California gold rush, a field of diamonds, rubies, and sapphires in the American West. The financial world exploded. Shares in the newly formed syndicate were snapped up by European royalty, German banks, and American millionaires like Charles Tiffany of Tiffany & Company and Samuel B. Aspinall, the financier. It was a craze born of greed and opportunity, an absolute blind faith in the idea that in America any miracle was possible. But in the vast, still wilderness of the American West, far from the velvet parlors and frenzied trading floors, a young man was meticulously drawing lines on a worn map. A man who was the antithesis of the avarice that fueled the diamond fever. The cartographer of truth. October 1872. A tent outside Evanston, Wyoming territory. Clarence King was only 30, yet he possessed a reputation that few men twice his age could claim. As the leader of the 40th Parallel Survey, he was mapping the uncharted American interior, a monumental task commissioned by Congress. He was a scientist, a writer, a connoisseur of art and literature, and a mountaineer, a polymath with an obsessive devotion to empirical truth. King sat hunched over a lamp, the wind rattling the canvas of his tent. He had just received a stack of telegrams from his friend and colleague, James D. Haig, detailing the hysteria gripping New York. Telegram from Haig. King, the madness is real. They say a mountain littered with stones. Have seen the samples. They are indeed genuine. Tiffany is involved. Rothschild controls the syndicate. This is not a trick. Get yourself to San Francisco immediately. Your expertise as a geologist is the only thing that can verify this. King frowned, running his finger over a geological fault line drawn on his map. He knew the lithology of the West better than anyone alive. He had cataloged the ancient volcanoes, the sedimentary basins, the glacial flows. Diamonds. He knew that diamonds form under conditions of immense heat and pressure, deep within the Earth's mantle, brought to the surface only by ancient, rare volcanic pipes, usually of a rock called kimberlite. The Rocky Mountains, he murmured to his assistant, Arnold Haig, brother of James. They are too young. The composition is wrong. There has never been a verified find of diamonds in situ, in their original rock, anywhere in North America. The vast geological forces that built the continent simply did not favor the creation of a surface diamond field. It defied every fundamental principle King had risked his life in the field to confirm. The only major diamond sources known were in South Africa and Brazil. Yet the stones were real, the money was real, the power structure involved was absolutely genuine. King saw the catastrophe immediately. If the field was real, it would be the greatest boom in history. If it was a hoax, a cleverly engineered deception, it would be the greatest scandal capable of crashing the U.S. stock market, permanently damaging the reputation of American finance, and crushing the savings of thousands of investors worldwide. The stakes were now not about a scientific curiosity. They were about national economic stability and integrity. Clarence King, the young man of science, made a swift decision that would pivot the entire course of his life and pit him against some of the most powerful and ruthless financiers in the world. He would abandon his official survey, secure a mule train and a few trusted men, and race across the hostile territory to find the Mountain of Diamonds, before the investor's private expedition, led by the wily Philip Arnold, could reach it and seal the fraud forever. He was racing against greed, against impossible geography, and against the collective delusion of an entire nation blinded by the promise of easy wealth. The truth, hidden deep in the Western landscape, was his only weapon. His journey had begun. The race against greed.
The Scramble from the States. October 25, 1872. Omaha, Nebraska. Omaha was the raw, beating heart of the American Continental Rush, a chaotic confluence of railway lines, cattle drives, and restless ambition. For Clarence King, it was merely a necessary staging post, a place to shed the gentlemanly facade of a Yale-educated scholar and assume the hardened skin of a Western surveyor. His first move was a calculated professional betrayal. He sent a curt yet formally worded dispatch to the Secretary of the Interior, resigning, or at least taking an immediate, indefinite, and unauthorized leave from the 40th Parallel Survey. He knew the political fallout would be catastrophic if he failed, but the scale of the impending disaster superseded all personal and professional risks. He was no longer just mapping America, he was trying to save its financial reputation. He kept only one man, Arnold Haig, his chief assistant. Arnold, younger but just as rigorously trained, was loyal, discreet, and possessed a cool head for logistics. King trusted his judgment and his silence. "We need speed, Arnold, and absolute anonymity," King instructed, standing on a noisy Omaha platform where the air smelled of coal smoke and wet lumber. "The syndicate is mobilizing their official party. They will travel in comfort, likely by train to San Francisco, then north by steamer, finally riding out with a large, conspicuous escort. That is the predictable path. We must be unpredictable." "And the Kentuckians, Arnold and Slack?" Haig asked, securing their few necessary crates of supplies, tents, simple rations, and most importantly, geological equipment. A surveyor's compass, a pickaxe, a streak plate for mineral testing, and the latest German-made microscope, a fragile instrument King insisted on carrying himself. "They are already gone," King replied, his eyes scanning the crowd, always alert. "They know the terrain. They are moving like ghosts to plant their evidence and disappear. We are not racing the syndicate. We are racing the hoaxers. If the hoaxers can secure a favorable, though fraudulent, appraisal before we reveal the truth, the stock will be sold, the money will vanish, and the U.S. economy will have swallowed a piece of glass worth billions." The logic of the lie. King understood that a successful fraud had to satisfy two conditions. It had to be astonishingly rich to justify the fever, and it had to be geologically plausible enough to fool everyone except the few who truly understood the Western composition. As they rode west from the railhead, purchasing hardy mules and horses, and adopting the look of inconspicuous miners heading for a bust-out silver claim, King refined his scientific deduction. "The gems are real, Arnold. That's the terrifying part," King explained one evening, tracing lines in the dust near their campfire in the shadow of the vast, indifferent plains. "They are sourced from the existing known markets, South Africa and Brazil. They are rough, unpolished, sold cheaply or stolen, and then transported." "But why place them where they did?" Haig asked. "Why not Nevada or Arizona?" King pointed to the west, towards the distant, jagged line of the Rocky Mountains. "Secrecy. The field must be in a place so remote, so hostile, that the hoaxers could claim it was too dangerous to police, thus justifying their control. But crucially, it has to be on the fringe of the established gold and silver rush, close enough to San Francisco for the financiers to believe they had a quick path to market, but far enough into the interior that no one would have accidentally stumbled upon a geological anomaly this large." He took a stick and drew a map. He eliminated the known active mining regions of California and Nevada as they were too well surveyed. He eliminated the arid, volcanic regions of New Mexico and Arizona as they were too sparsely populated and logistically difficult. It must be a mesa, a desolate, high-altitude plateau, likely in the intersection of the Wyoming, Utah, and Colorado territories, a place of immense, forgotten solitude. The hoaxers would pick a region whose geology, while not supporting diamonds, was at least ambiguous, where strange mineralization has occurred, allowing them to claim a new, undiscovered type of volcanic pipe. The logic was chillingly precise. Arnold and Slack hadn't just picked a spot, they had engineered a geological narrative for their lie. King's task was now reduced from searching the entire West to isolating a specific type of elevated wilderness in a particular triple-state border region.
The Trail of the Forgotten Mesa. The journey itself became a testament to King's iron will. He pushed his small party relentlessly. They traversed dusty, alkali deserts that left their throats raw, climbed steep wooded slopes where the mules struggled for purchase, and crossed frigid high mountain passes where the thin air made every breath an exhausting chore. To avoid detection, they steered clear of established trails and settlements, relying on King's meticulous topographic maps, compiled over years of his official survey. Their clothes grew ragged, their faces sun-scorched and wind-burned. They were often mistaken for impoverished prospectors or errant trappers, a necessary disguise. One frosty morning, camped near a tributary of the Green River, they came across what King had feared, a fresh set of tracks. Not the large official prints of the coming syndicate expedition, but the light, shrewdly concealed trail of a smaller party, moving fast and leaving little trace. "Arnold and Slack," King stated, kneeling to examine the slight depression in the muddy bank. "They're a few weeks ahead, maybe less. They've gone north of the established mining paths. They're heading into the area I suspected, the headwaters region, the mesas that overlook the Great Basins." Their urgency spiked. The syndicate's team, led by Colonel George D. Roberts, a trusted mining engineer, was scheduled to arrive on the West Coast soon. King had to get to the location, expose the fraud, and then somehow intercept Roberts before the engineer could send a confirming wire to New York. The financial crash would occur the moment a reputable engineer signed off on the claim. The pressure weighed heavily, transforming King from the idealistic young scientist into a focused man of action. He had to be smarter, faster, and more ruthless than the fraudsters who sought to exploit the nation's hunger for wealth. King pressed on, his eyes constantly on the horizon, searching for the telltale shape of the Mesa of Deception. Weeks bled into months. By the time the first snows dusted the peaks in November, King and Haig were deep in a hostile, unmapped wilderness. The silence was profound, broken only by the crackle of their fire and the distant howl of coyotes. They were close. King felt it, a geological sixth sense honed by years in the field. Then, one frigid afternoon, while ascending a steep, heavily eroded escarpment, Haig stumbled upon an unmistakable sign. A cairn of stones, crudely erected, but next to it the unmistakable print of a boot sole from the east, not a worn cowboy boot, but one suited to a city street, now battered by the trail. "They've marked the trail, but deliberately so that only those who know what to look for will find it," King whispered, peering at the way the rocks were angled. "This is their path. The diamond field is near, Arnold. Prepare yourself. We are about to see either the greatest geological miracle in history or the most brilliant lie." He knew it deep down, but knowing it and proving it were two different battles. They continued their climb, rounding a final bend in the trail carved into the sheer rock face. Below them, the world fell away into a dizzying valley, and above, silhouetted against the stark winter sky, was the plateau. It was vast, flat, and chillingly isolated.
a forgotten table of rock untouched by the rest of the world, the Diamond Mesa. King lifted his telescope and scanned the plateau, not looking for diamonds, but for signs of human manipulation. And then he saw it, a small, almost insignificant cluster of overturned earth, a recent disturbance that shouldn't exist in such a barren, windy place. The stage was set. The scientist had reached the lair of the hoaxers. Now the proof had to be found before the financial world burned. The narrative continues with King and Haig's clandestine exploration of the diamond field, their discovery of the salting technique, and the critical piece of evidence that would prove the fraud. V. Unmasking the imposters. The scientific crucible. The lure of the treasure. Late November 1872, the Diamond Mesa, northwestern Colorado Territory. The silence of the plateau was absolute, broken only by the whip of the high-altitude wind. Clarence King and Arnold Haig stood on a wide, flat expanse of reddish, dusty soil, staring down at a site that defied all reason, yet was undeniably real. The ground was littered with treasure. Not just dustings of color, but raw, fist-sized pockets of mineral wealth. Rough, unpolished stones lay scattered in the crevices of the weather-beaten sandstone. There were white, irregular diamonds, deep crimson rubies, emeralds the color of dark jade, and sapphires of an impossible velvety blue. The density was astounding, a geologic nightmare and a financier's dream. Haig let out a breath, a sound closer to a gasp than a sigh. "My God, King, they were right. It's real." For a paralyzing moment, even King, the staunch empiricist, felt the dizzying pull of doubt. His years of rigorous study, his maps, his certainty about the West's lack of kimberlite, all seemed to crumble under the sheer glittering weight of the evidence beneath their boots. This was a fortune beyond calculation, sitting exposed on a lonely American mesa. "No, Arnold," King said, his voice strained, fighting the irrational awe. He forced himself to crouch down, not to grasp the stones, but to examine the matrix, the surrounding earth. This landscape is sedimentary, a relic of ancient seabeds. This is not the ancient deep volcanic ground required for diamonds. If this is a hoax, it is the most meticulously staged deception in history. If we allow this to pass, we will be responsible for crushing the integrity of American capital. They set up their makeshift camp several hundred yards away, hidden in the lee of a rocky outcrop, and began their desperate forensic investigation. They were no longer just geologists, they were detectives of the earth.
The smoking gun in the anthill. King knew he couldn't simply dismiss the gems. He had to prove they were planted. This meant looking for the minute, telltale signs of human intervention, or more specifically, geological impossibility. The work was methodical and backbreaking. For days they crawled the ground, ignoring the thousands of dollars worth of gems sparkling inches from their eyes. They focused on the soil, the crevices, and the pattern of the gems' dispersal. The streak plate test. King first tested the hardness. The diamonds, sapphires, and rubies all passed the scratch test. They were genuinely hard, high-quality minerals. The hoaxers hadn't used cheap quartz or glass. They had invested heavily in real, stolen, or black market stones. The matrix question. King took samples of the rock that seemed to cradle the gems. Under his microscope, the rock proved to be common sandstone and shale, not the kimberlite or lamproite pipes essential for diamond formation. The stones were simply resting in the soil, not embedded in the source rock. The improbable mix. King began categorizing the gem types. He laid them out on a small cloth. African octahedrons, he murmured, pointing to a diamond with 8 faces, next to Brazilian dodecahedrons. And here, a Burmese ruby beside a Ceylonese sapphire. He looked up at Haig, his eyes burning with conviction. No natural field on Earth produces this indiscriminate mixture. A geological find is defined by its consistent mineral suite. This is a collector's hoard. It is sourced globally. The final, devastating proof came late one evening near a small, peculiar mound of earth. "Look at this, Arnold," King instructed. He pointed to a small cluster of tiny rough diamonds resting right on the lip of an anthill. He carefully, painstakingly sifted the dirt directly underneath the anthill using a fine screen. What he found wasn't just dirt. It was a cluster of even smaller, lower-grade diamonds, mixed with a fine residue of earth. The implication hit Haig with the force of a physical blow. They're using the ants. The hoaxer planted large caches of the stones into the soil, and then deliberately disturbed the anthills. The ants, in their natural process of excavation, brought the smaller stones to the surface, dispersing them naturally around their mounds. It makes the field look like a continuous, self-renewing source. This was the stroke of genius in the fraud, the meticulous effort to make the salting look like the tireless work of nature. The flawed geode. King now knew how the fraud was committed. His focus shifted to proving the hoaxers were present and that the gems were recently planted. He needed a piece of evidence that the hoaxers, in their greed and haste, had overlooked. He began looking for evidence of tools. After several hours of searching near the scattered, freshly overturned dirt, he found a patch of dry clay where someone had obviously knelt down. And in that patch, slightly covered by the wind-blown dust, was a small, unmistakable indentation. The heel print of a boot. Freshly made, King noted, measuring it against his own. But look here. He pointed to a large, prominent ruby resting in a nearby rock crevice. This was the showpiece gem, placed to be discovered immediately. King levered the ruby out of the crevice with his pickaxe. It was set snugly, but underneath it, resting on the hard rock, was something that made King finally smile. A grim, victorious smile. It was a tiny scrap of paper, almost microscopic, frayed at the edges and damp with condensation. King carefully retrieved it and placed it under his microscope. The paper was clearly English-made, and upon it, stamped in faded blue ink, were 2 words: J. Samuel & Co. He knew that name instantly. J. Samuel & Co. was a well-known, legitimate, but discreet London gem broker. The hoaxers, Philip Arnold and John Slack, must have purchased their massive inventory of rough gems in London. And this microscopic scrap, the equivalent of a packing slip, had been carried over 4,000 miles, stuck to the bottom of the ruby, and accidentally left behind. It was the impossible evidence. A piece of industrial London, found on a remote, barren mesa in the heart of the American wilderness. It was the absolute, unassailable proof that the gems had been imported and planted, not formed in the earth below. The diamond field was a colossal $60 million mirage. "We have to move," King announced, standing up, ignoring the cold. He scooped up a few key samples, the London paper, the mixed globally gems, and the non-kimberlite matrix rock, and strapped them securely to his mule. "We have to reach the syndicate's engineer, Roberts. He's on his way. We need to reach his party before he reaches this spot and sends the wire. We may have 4 days of hard riding before the world is fooled." His mission had shifted from detection to a desperate high-speed chase. The fate of Wall Street now rested on the speed of his mule and the strength of his own desperate resolve. The Iron Horse and the Mule Train. December 1872. The Great Basin, Utah Territory. With the microscopic scrap of London paper and the sample of globally sourced gems secured, Clarence King and Arnold Haig turned their backs on the Mesa of Deception.
The long days of scientific rigor gave way to a relentless, punishing pace of travel. They were no longer racing the hoaxers, Philip Arnold and John Slack, who had vanished with the seed money. They were racing time and Colonel George D. Roberts. Roberts was the syndicate's chief mining engineer, an honest man, but one operating with confirmation bias, fueled by the promise of historic wealth. If Roberts reached the mesa, spent a day finding the planted gems, and sent back a single coded telegram confirming the existence of the field, the San Francisco and New York mining company stock would instantly flood the market, causing a financial boom followed by an immediate devastating crash when the truth inevitably surfaced. King had 4 days, maybe 5, before Roberts was due to arrive. King pushed his small mule train towards the nearest reliable link to the outside world, the Central Pacific Railroad line that crossed the vast, desolate stretches of the Great Basin. "We cannot outrun a train, Arnold," King gasped, his breath ragged from the cold air and the nonstop gallop. "We must reach the telegraph station at Fort Bridger, O'Rawlins first. We have to intercept Roberts' outgoing wire." The journey was a blur of frozen nights and desperate days. They rode through dust storms and bitter, windswept passes. King carried the evidence like a sacred relic, a satchel containing the non-kimberlite rock samples, the mixed gems, and critically, the microscope itself. The fate of Wall Street hinged on the survival of that fragile instrument.
The unbeliever. King's exhausted party finally reached the small, lonely telegraph station at Rawlins, Wyoming Territory. They had beaten the syndicate's engineer by perhaps a single day. He sent an immediate, frantic telegram to his friend, James D. Haig, in New York, who had first warned him. Telegram to Haig: "Found field. Diamonds are salted. Hoax is vast. Must see Roberts before he cables. Heading San Francisco. Prepare the evidence. The world is about to crash." His next action was the crucial interception. King learned that Colonel Roberts and his party were moving on a path that would briefly intersect the main stagecoach route 200 miles west. King and Haig rode out one last time, meeting Roberts' small, well-equipped party in a dusty, windswept valley. Roberts, a stern, impeccably dressed military man, was furious at the intrusion. "Mr. King, what is the meaning of this? I am on the most sensitive mission of my career to verify the greatest mineral strike in history. I don't have time for a former surveyor," Roberts snapped, clearly annoyed by King's ragged, wild appearance. King dismounted, ignoring the man's scorn. "Colonel, I have already been to the site. I know the location, and I have the proof that this is the most sophisticated fraud ever conceived. You must turn back." Roberts laughed, a cold, dismissive sound. "Sir, I have heard the rumors of skeptics. My instructions are clear. I am to certify a field that has already been verified by Rothschild's experts and is backed by the wealthiest men in this country." King didn't argue further. He opened his satchel and presented the evidence. "Colonel, look at this. Brazilian dodecahedrons mixed with South African octahedrons lying in the same crevice. Now look closer." He opened a small vial and pulled out the minuscule scrap of paper, magnifying it under a small hand lens. "This is a packing slip from a London gem broker, J. Samuel & Co. It was carried here, stuck to the bottom of a large ruby, and accidentally dropped when the gems were planted. The entire field is a salting operation." Roberts, a man whose life was built on empirical observation, was visually stunned. He knew the principles of geology and the consistency of natural mineral finds. The sight of globally mixed gems and the evidence of a European import house lying in the middle of a barren American mesa was a contradiction that shattered his professional certainty. He paused, then slowly, reluctantly, nodded. "If you are wrong, King, you have cost me my career and the syndicate an immeasurable fortune. But I cannot dismiss this.
I will accompany you back to San Francisco. We will present your evidence before I send any cable. The first victory was won. Roberts agreed to silence his wire, and the clock was ticking down to the final dramatic confrontation. The Takedown in San Francisco, January 7th, 1873. The headquarters of the San Francisco and New York Mining Company, San Francisco, California. The room was opulent, a temple to finance. Mahogany tables, gaslight chandeliers, and the collective wealth of the nation gathered in one place. Seated around the massive table were General Dodge, the principal American financier Samuel B. Aspinwall, and the local lawyers representing Baron Rothschild. The atmosphere was celebratory. They were mere hours away from the final certification and the stock launch. Clarence King, looking exhausted but formidable, stood at the head of the table next to the subdued Colonel Roberts. He laid out his simple, powerful display. Exhibit A, the Matrix Rock. Gentlemen, diamonds require kimberlite, an ancient volcanic pipe. This mesa is composed of recent sandstone. Geologically, the mountain is a beautiful lie. Exhibit B, the mixed gems. He displayed the samples. No natural field on Earth produces African diamonds, Brazilian emeralds, and Burmese rubies side by side. This collection was meticulously purchased from global gem markets. Exhibit C, the smoking gun. He presented the final, irrefutable proof, placing the tiny, stamped slip of London paper under a large magnifying glass for all to see. This trace evidence from J. Samuel & Co. proves that the gems were recently purchased and transported. Furthermore, we discovered how the field was seeded. The diamonds were systematically planted into anthills to simulate a natural geological process of dispersal. A stunned silence fell over the room. General Dodge, a man who had faced cannon fire, looked visibly pale. The scale of the deception was breathtaking. They hadn't just been duped, they had been played by a scientific masterwork of fraud. They risked everything on our greed, and on the assumption that no one would dare question the geology, King concluded. You were not investing in a field, gentlemen. You were investing in a few months of one man's criminal labor. Roberts, King's recent adversary, now became his ally. He stepped forward. I have examined Mr. King's evidence, and I have studied his findings. I concur. The field is salted. This entire enterprise is a colossal fraud. The effect was instantaneous and dramatic. The Rothschild representative immediately withdrew the Baron's entire stake. General Dodge, his pride wounded, ordered the immediate public disclosure of the findings to prevent any stock offering. Clarence King had successfully intercepted the lie using pure science to disarm the greatest financial deception in American history. He had saved the fortunes of thousands of investors and protected the vulnerable integrity of the U.S. financial markets from an international scandal of unprecedented scope. The Great Diamond Hoax of 1872 was exposed not by lawmen or detectives, but by a young American geologist who valued truth more than treasure.
The aftermath and legacy. The fall of the House of Cards. January 1873, San Francisco and New York City. The public disclosure that the San Francisco and New York Mining Company was built entirely on a magnificent lie sent immediate, devastating shockwaves through the American and European financial markets. General George S. Dodge, humbled and furious, immediately issued a full, damning statement. He revealed that Clarence King, the young geologist, had uncovered the hoax just hours before the syndicate was set to certify the claim and launch its stock. The initial public reaction was a volatile mixture of relief, outrage, and humiliation. The relief stemmed from the fact that King's intervention had prevented a catastrophic market crash. Had the stock launched and traded for a few weeks before the lie was discovered, thousands of small investors would have been wiped out, leading to widespread financial panic. The outrage was directed at the elusive hoaxers, Philip Arnold and John Slack, and the sheer audacity of the scheme. The humiliation was felt most keenly by the wealthy, seasoned financiers, Rothschild, Dodge, Tiffany, who had been blinded by their own greed and utterly fooled by a couple of shrewd Kentuckians. The phrase "bought and sold" suddenly had a very literal meaning in the parlors of high society. Within a week, the San Francisco and New York Mining Company was dissolved. Investors recouped only a fraction of their initial capital, but the damage to their pride was total. The press, led by Horace Greeley's own newspapers, who had been deeply invested, reveled in the story. They hailed King as a national savior, a man of science who had preserved the nation's economic honor. The contrast was stark: the honest, rigorous intellectual versus the avaricious, easily deceived businessman. The justice that never was. While King basked in unexpected national celebrity, the focus of law enforcement turned to the perpetrators. However, Arnold and Slack proved as cunning in retreat as they had been in deception. They had executed their scheme brilliantly, taking care to never directly commit an act that was definitively illegal by the standards of the time. They sold the idea of the diamond field, showed real diamonds, and took payment for controlling the rights to the claim. They never explicitly guaranteed the field was inexhaustible, merely that it was what they had found. Philip Arnold, the mastermind, had already wired his initial $300,000 payment into his secure Swiss accounts. He surfaced briefly in Kentucky, where he used a portion of his windfall to repay old debts and purchase property, appearing almost as a folk hero to some. The syndicate, desperate to recover their funds, eventually tracked Arnold down. After a tense standoff and complex legal maneuvering, Arnold agreed to a settlement. In exchange for the financiers dropping their lawsuits and ceasing their pursuit, he returned approximately $150,000, a token amount compared to the tens of millions lost in investment, but enough to close the case and save face for the syndicate. He kept the rest of the original payment. John Slack, Arnold's accomplice, disappeared entirely into the anonymity of the American West. He was never charged or heard from again, having executed his role perfectly and vanished into history. The hoaxers got away with the majority of their initial ill-gotten gains. Their ultimate, unofficial sentence was to live out the rest of their lives in paranoia, forever looking over their shoulders, unable to truly enjoy the vast wealth they had amassed through their audacious, brilliant lie. The Geologist's triumph. Clarence King's role in the diamond hoax transformed him from a brilliant, esoteric government scientist into a public icon. His integrity and his ability to save the nation from ruin were celebrated across America. This fame launched his career to heights he could never have achieved by simply mapping the 40th parallel. In 1879, Congress, recognizing his unique combination of scientific brilliance and administrative acumen, appointed the 37-year-old King as the first director of the United States Geological Survey, the USGS. The USGS, under King's leadership, was built on the very principles he had championed: absolute, uncompromising scientific truth to serve the national interest. He ensured that the government would never again be so easily fooled by a geological fantasy. The Great Diamond Hoax of 1872 left behind two lasting legacies: a national caution. It instilled a deep, healthy skepticism in American finance about the miraculous mineral finds of the West, creating the first modern need for independent, scientifically rigorous verification before public investment. The rise of science. It firmly established the essential role of empirical geology and the integrity of American scientists like King as vital safeguards against unbridled greed and fraud. The story became a foundational myth, a reminder that in the rush for gold and diamonds, truth is the ultimate currency. Clarence King's life, though ending prematurely and tragically, was forever defined by that single, daring ride across the frozen West. He remains one of the most astonishing, yet often overlooked heroes of American history, a man who, with a simple microscope and an unyielding commitment to science, prevented a global financial disaster. And that's the end of today's story. The shadows of the past remind us how fragile life can be and how history always has lessons to teach. If you enjoyed this video and want more amazing historical stories, make sure you like, comment your thoughts below, and subscribe to Data of the Past. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that brings the past to life. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.